Welcome to the Undefined Leader, where we reimagine leadership, redefine work, and get curious. In episode 4, I believe, we talked about the history of leadership and how it's changed over the years. Last episode, we talked about the current workforce and what leadership styles support the current workforce. Today, we're going to talk about the future workforce. Who is the future workforce? And we're going to try to predict what leadership skills we think are going to be high in demand for the future. Ready, Derek?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All
I
right.
am curious, right? That's how we always start, right? What are we curious about? So,
Yeah. What are you curious about?
yeah, I'm curious about where we are with this, just both of us individually on kind of dealing with Gen Zs, and with both of us being millennials, even though, I'm maybe in what they call the elder millennial group, and then but we're still in that millennial group of where we're at in our thinking on how we maybe differ a little bit than our younger colleagues, the Gen Zs.
Yeah, I'm curious too, because when we're doing research and thinking through this, there are definitely a lot of similarities between millennials and Gen Zs, but there are a lot of differences too. So let's get started with the similarities. What are some similarities of what millennials and Gen Zs value, especially in a workplace?
The One of the big differences, as we've been talking about, as you go from the previous generations and then you get into that, the more modern of the millennials and the Gen Z, is a shift from kind of viewing the role of work in your life and the status of like your job title versus your personality and things, and like how you view yourself versus I think a lot of the previous generations, if you ask them like, hey, who are you, or tell me about yourself, they're going to lead with their job title or what they do. And then you start to get, I think, a shift away from that with millennials and Gen Zs, where they might tell you something else about themselves first. More so Gen Zs, definitely more so Gen Zs. But I think millennials started to create that shift a little bit of not necessarily viewing their whole identity around what they do for work.
Yeah, I do love that change, obviously, because I'm also a millennial. But you definitely do see it in previous generations where one of the second things you'd say when you introduce yourself, your name, and then usually it's your title, your occupation. And even we're seeing, especially with Gen Z now, that they are actually job hopping a lot more than previous generations, and they see it as a positive. So it's clear that their identity, that title, is not part of who they are. And what they value more, actually, similar with millennials, is the education and the experience that they're gaining from work.
Yeah, I think with the boomers especially, it's very common for to see like they're retiring from a company that they spent 40 years at, and that was just kind of normal. And there's a lot of things that go into that of when they were entering the workforce, it was super competitive. So if you were able to get a good job, you did not want to leave it. You wanted to stay there and work for a company. And Gen X's kind of followed a little bit of that type of thinking as well. They're very like hard workers, work hard, play hard type of focus. And just again, just not as much opportunity for mobility too, with just like the competitive nature of things. But then with the explosion of the internet and the ability to have side hustles and work for startups and different things, there's just so much opportunity out of there, and that the millennials and the Gen Zs have been able to take advantage of. I don't know, for me in my age group or younger, I don't know anyone that's really been at one place for 10, 15 years. I don't think anyone really has that thought that that would even be something that they would want to do on things. So it is kind of interesting. And the older generations, I think, look at that as disloyalty. Like, how could you not be loyal to your company and move around? And millennials and Gen Zs, I don't think loyalty is part of the equation.
Well, I think layoffs that started happening in the 80s is a really big part of that because loyalty was something that we valued so much in a company. And what before the 80s, before layoffs started happening, employees felt like there was a mutual relationship with their employer of I'll be loyal to you and you're loyal to me. And knowing that when times are tough, the first thing that's going to be cut is not me. And now I think it's such a norm that especially big corporations are doing layoffs, that we've lost trust in the fact that during bad times that I'm going to be taken care of. So it's kind of like putting myself first and saying, well, I'm going to experience and keep my options open. And so I think, again, in one of our episodes, we talked about the history of leadership and how the economy and world events have shaped part of that. I think this might be one of those examples again.
And this is interesting too, because we did an episode on feedback, like meaningful feedback, and we talked in that episode about how ideally it's a conversation that goes both ways. So maybe one of the negatives of this that is kind of created is that now a millennial or a Gen Z might do something like quiet quit, like not give the feedback that I'm unhappy, I don't like it here, I don't like what's going on, I don't like decisions. In their mind, it's like, well, I'll just kind of quietly find another job versus express those things. And I think a lot of what you're saying too is the safety thing. It's not necessarily safe to maybe mention that I don't like what's going on, or I'm not happy, or I want changes, because you are worried that you're not going to be taken care of during those times. And so that's, I think, part of the moving around is when you're unhappy or not satisfied, it just makes more sense maybe to find a new place to go work than to try to improve or fix the place that you're at. And maybe just like the reality of it too, or the realism of like, how much are these things going to change? I need to go find what I'm looking for, whether rather than trying to create that where I'm at.
Yeah, because both of those generations do value job security. Job security is a very big part of what they value, but I think their perspective on job security is different than previous generations of what we
Mhm.
thought job security is too. One of the things that is a similarity between millennials and Gen Z, which is going to be our future workforce, is the value they put on continued education. Like they really, really value career growth, personal growth, feeling like they are learning every single day. Did you find that in your research too?
Absolutely. Millennials are the most educated generation of all the generations, and Gen Z are right there. They just need more time, to have time to get more degrees and more education. So just already right out of the gate, there's a high value on education. But what you're saying too is the continuous, like it's
Hmm.
always ongoing. And that's just what I've seen. I mean, I experienced it myself as a millennial. I went back to school and got a master's degree, and I'm always looking for things that I can learn, or courses or videos or podcasts, because I want to keep learning. And if it's not being provided to me, I'm going to go get it myself. But I think there is that expectation that being an employee of a place, like you're gonna help me grow, and you're gonna help me learn, and not only work related, but with the Gen Zs as well. Even getting into a lot of like personal skills.
Yeah. I think it's actually really interesting, and we should have an entire episode about this down the road. But majority of Gen Zs don't actually want management roles. They
Hmm.
don't want to grow in that hierarchy of becoming a manager. Main reason being they believe that once you become a manager, you stop growing. Your leaders above you are not continuing to educate you and provide resources for you, and you actually gain more stress without actually personally growing in itself.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating that what does that say about what's going on, that the Gen Zs are entering companies and looking around and saying, hey, once you become a leader or a manager, you stop growing and you stop learning. That's kind of scary, right? I think there should be a lot of self-reflection on why are they seeing that, or why are they feeling that way.
Yeah. I think they're definitely feeling a lot of the stress and burnout that current leaders and managers have right now. And yeah, to your point, that is very scary, and we should be reflecting on it. And let's have another episode based off of that, because I can think of so many cons that come from a newer generation not wanting to have leadership titles and roles.
It's not going to
That's a
work.
whole, that's
Companies,
not going to
it's
work.
not going to
Yeah.
work. Yeah, companies need future leaders, right? They need to fill that gap. Managers and leaders retire. You need to add in new ones. And if you just have a gap of an entire generation that doesn't want to do that, it's not going to work. It's going to be a problem.
The weird thing is, though, even though they don't want to be managers and leaders within a company, Gen Z, they're saying, is the biggest entrepreneurial generation. that we have. Obviously, I mean, that is a leadership role in itself. You're creating your own business and you want to be an entrepreneur, yet you don't want to be a leader for an established company. Why
Right.
do you think that is?
I think a lot of it is what we're saying too. They're just saying like, why? Like, what is the benefit of aspiring to that and becoming that when I could just go do my own things and work for myself and have full autonomy? It's not necessarily that the managers, like an entry level manager, gets paid anymore. It's not that they get access to different opportunities. So I think they're just looking at it as an ROI. Like, this doesn't seem to make my life any better. And we started this conversation too about how millennials and Gen Zs are less likely to identify themselves as their occupation. So already as a Gen Z, if you don't view your self identity as your title, what is the benefit to it? They see all their leaders and managers as stressed out and burned out and anxious and all these issues that go into it. So I don't blame them.
Yeah. And the reason that they want entrepreneurship, besides everything you just said, is because what they care more about that title and career is self-fulfillment. They're looking, both millennials and Gen Zs, going back to our original question of what are the similarities, they both value having an impact on their community, on life, and having a mission, having a purpose. They're very purpose-driven generations. And so when they create their own business, one, they're able to have that flexibility in their work-life balance, which is another big similarity between millennials and Gen Zs of what they value, that work-life balance, as well as fulfillment and impact on the world.
Yeah, there's that idea behind purpose driven work has shifted, like for like a Gen X, who came before the millennials. It's almost like this idea of, I'm going to work hard, make money so that I can have my other, like my dual identity, right? Like a hard separation, work hard, play hard. So I don't want to say like to the point where like the job itself doesn't matter, because it does always matter for everybody, but just a little less so, where they can like be okay with doing work or having jobs that, doesn't really spark their passion or things like that, because they're going to have hobbies and vacations and friend groups that give that to them. So they're kind of okay with that separation. And then even for like boomers, they just, again, like, it was competitive. It's just like a stable career and a paycheck is more important. Yeah. Now, as we get into purpose driven work, I completely agree. The millennials and the Gen Zs want work that has a clear mission, clear core values, clear purpose. And also a similarity is they want to always know the clear why behind the work that they're doing. So again, does the company have a clear sense of why we exist as a company? It's, something we call like the company identity of that
Mhm.
company. Why do we exist? Why do we do these things? And millennials and Gen Zs, it's really important to them that that's articulated by the leaders there at that company.
You can tell that businesses are picking up on this already because 8 years ago, when I was applying for jobs, job descriptions and job ads out there looked like every single one of them looked like this. Here are your qualifications. Don't even think of applying if you don't hit all these benchmarks. And here is what we're looking from you. Versus if you look at job ads that are out there today, it is all about the company's mission, core values, their why, and then what they do is where they have the requirements and they outline what the role is that they're looking for, that ties to the overall company's mission. And I think that's so important because that is what future workforce cares about. And I think as a leader, something that you could do is when you have a millennial Gen Z person that you're leading, thinking of what are they doing on the day to day and how does that impact the overall goal of the company, the overall goal of or mission of what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, I think that ties right in to, a similar overlap between the millennials and the Gen Z is just not only that clarity that you're talking about from the company and knowing who they are and why they do things, but from the leaders inside the company of being authentic, being transparent, being vulnerable, and not being the stuffy corporate lingo and buzzwords and just kind of empty talk. Millennials and Gen Zs want more authenticity. Not only out of the
Mhm.
company like you're talking about and the job postings and things like that, but from the leadership styles like we've been talking about here of the leaders there, that they know how to be their authentic self, like they understand the why as well. They're able to articulate it, live it, not be hypocritical about it, be vulnerable when they're not living it or not aligned with the mission or things are going on. And that kind of creates that environment that I think that a lot of millennials and Gen Z are seeking, which might also lead to a lot of their job hopping as well, because I think that's really hard to find.
Yeah, authenticity, empathy, and open communication is what they're looking for the most from their leaders. So if you're a leader or a future leader that wants to develop some of your skills for the future workforce, definitely those three areas is something to really develop in yourself. The other reason I heard why they're job hopping so much is is to learn more. Going back to our original part, they don't want to stay in one company at all times, but they see the value in actually taking a job that they have no experience in. But because we're so learners and we know that we're good at learning, we're able to go into any job and say, teach me and I will figure it out, and then I'm going to perfect that and be very good at this job. And then now I've learned enough I have here, and I'll go to a next job as well.
Yeah. Something I want to get into on this episode that we haven't gotten into yet on kind of like the previous ones about talking about what, you know, generations want and things like that is under the umbrella of work-life balance. You mentioned that before, right? That millennials and Gen Zs, they want work-life balance, but I kind of want to introduce two new terms into the umbrella of work-life balance. And those are work-life integration and work-life boundaries. And those are two different things that fall under the idea of work-life balance. But I think, if we're kind of transitioning a little bit into some of the differences, so they're similar generations and then they want work-life balance. But I think the millennials and Gen Zs have a little different approach to what that means. Because another similarity is they want flexibility, adaptivity.
Hmm.
We're seeing like hybrid work schedules, work from home, being able to work remote. But I think it's for different reasons that they want it. So I relate to the millennial idea of work-life integration a lot. And it's this idea of tying into flexibility of like, why do you need me here? Clocking in at 8 and leaving at 5 because I wake up in the morning and I look at my emails. I might, respond to some Slack messages while I'm eating breakfast. I might do some emails or Slacks while I'm working out during my lunch break. Like, get off my case about the exact hours because I never stop working. I never stop thinking about it. I'm able to enjoy my life and have, separation and things like that. But again, I relate to this because I know this is how I've kind of always thought about things. Like, I'll check my emails at night. Like, I don't view that as interrupting my work-life balance. And so that's where, millennials, I think, get um, really caught up in this flexibility, adaptivity of like, hey, leader, stay, get off my case if I'm a few minutes late because look at the email timestamps. I sent you, I was doing things this morning. It's so like, don't ride me or micromanage me this much about the actual time clock
Hmm.
versus I think with Gen Zs and this work-life boundaries, they want a little bit more of like, it's 4 p.m. Do not text me. Do not call me. I'm not going to look at anything until I clock back in tomorrow. So it's all work-life balance, but it's a little different approach. Have you kind of, or can you relate to one of those versus the other, Alex, or have you kind of seen this a little before?
Yeah, don't tell me to sit in front of a computer 9 to 5. Like, I know what I need to do in my job to be successful, and I will take whatever hours it takes to do it. I might work a weekend here to get something done, but over here, maybe I take a Monday off because I was able to get everything done and I'm not needed at a certain time. I'm curious though, how much of that is actually different versus how much of it is millennials trying to adapt to the current structure versus Gen Z? It seems like they're not trying to adapt. They're more bold in speaking up and saying, hey, why are we doing it this way? Here's a better way to do it. Versus I feel like sometimes millennials might value very similar things that Gen Z does, and we think the same things, but we didn't speak up as much. And we've just adapted to our leaders who are previous generations that are maybe workaholics, people that value that very structure. And so we're like, okay, well, how can I compromise a little bit? Do you think that's the case at all? Or do you truly think it's two very separate things?
I think it is a little bit of both. I think there is something pretty unique about the millennials in that we were the first generation to kind of have that distinct shift that we can think of, not having a cell phone, not having email, like in our development years, and then at some point it kind of happening, right? Versus Gen Zs have never experienced that. It's like always existed a little bit. So, I think there just is a little bit of life experience that does separate it, a little bit. So all of a sudden now getting a cell phone for me as a millennial, like I remember getting a cell phone and it like opened up this whole new way to live for me where it's sort of like, what? I could like communicate with my friends on the go. I didn't have to sit at home and wait for the phone, to ring. And so the ability to check emails in the morning or, do things at night is almost like, look what we're capable of. Versus a Gen Z, it's almost like a curse for them because they've always had it. And so I think even a shift there, it was like millennials that created social media. Like it was our generation that created all of this type of stuff to constantly be connected, to constantly have these things. And now we see Gen Z reject a lot of that, of like, that is not good. And so, like, a lot of Gen Zs don't want Facebook and they don't want things like that. Cause I think Gen Z is looking at the millennial experiment a little bit and saying, like, hey, mental health is really important. You can't be connected all the time. You can't do all these things all the time. And for us as millennials, we're like, what do you mean? This is amazing.
Hmm. I remember hearing an app that was really popular within Gen Z. I don't even remember what it is now, but it was something, it was like social media, but an authentic version of it. So it would say, like, you can send a picture to your friends, but it would say how many times you retook that picture, for example. So again, it shows how Gen Z values authenticity so much and transparency a lot too. Speaking of all this technology as well, I know one of the differences we found between millennials and Gen Z was, even though the similarity is that they both value education so much, it seemed like millennials valued continuous education versus Gen Z valued rapid, quick education. I think that's because of technology a
Hmm.
bit too. Their entire life, they didn't have to open up an encyclopedia to find an answer. You're able to Google something, get answers quickly. And so that is the way that they've learned their entire life. So now that is what they're expecting from businesses and their leaders as well. Do you have any other thoughts on that or
I think
insight?
you're onto something there. And even though I am a millennial, I'm feeling in this conversation like I'm old. I'm talking about like, back in the day things. But again, when I was in school, like if you wanted to learn something, you had to go to the library. It was a slower continual process versus the ability to just instantly learn anything you wanted to learn.
Yeah. And our
And
grandparents had to walk in the
I
storms
know
to go to
uphill both
school.
ways. Yeah. But there wasn't as much, again, during the formative learning years of the school age, like it wasn't a rapid process. It required research. I mean, how many Gen Zs have gone to a library? I bet it's pretty low. Just because why would they? Everything in the library is available online and explained in videos and things like that. So that I just think there's an expectation that learning can happen fast, which is good. Like, it's, I think generations improve and get better and learn and embrace technologies. And so I think this is a good thing. The issue is when they're being led by somebody who doesn't value it the same way that they value it. And so I think one of the quickest ways to lose a Gen Z employee is to push them off and be like, well, we'll get to that next quarter. Or, yeah, we've got different priorities right now. I'll make sure you do that, next week, next month, next quarter, next year. And the Gen Z's no rapid.
Hmm.
Right? And the Gen Z too, with growing up with all the technology, they're capable of multitasking. Like I can get my things done and learn. It's okay.
I don't believe in multitasking, but we'll bring that up on a different episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so far we talked about some similarities and differences between the future workforce, which is millennials and Gen Z. So we said they are purpose driven, values driven, people first. They value being seen as a person and not just a number within a company. They want to see an impact, the direct impact of how what they are doing and their contributions to the overall purpose of the business. We talked about work life balance and different perspectives around that. Is there anything else that we want to add that we think the future workforce values that leaders should be thinking of?
We could, just to throw in here and to be thorough, both millennials and Gen Zs have similar ideas about autonomy. They want to be trusted. They want to be empowered. I think as you get into Gen Zs even more, they don't necessarily know how to operate in a vertical hierarchy. And so some of it is like they'll get into trouble, of like not being seen as respectful of authority. They'll see the CEO or the VP in the hall and say, "Hey, bro," or they'll talk the way that they would talk to their friends, and then the older generation person gets all offended about the lack of respect and professionalism. But for the Gen Z, it's not a lack of respect or professionalism. It's actually an ultimate form of like respect, and that they're sort of viewing as like an equal here, and they're talking to you as a leader the way that they would talk to their friend. That's actually a high compliment that they would speak to you that way. But the older generations don't see it. So I think there's also just like a language gap on things. And I think it stems back to that idea of the vertical hierarchy. And Gen Zs, I think, just have a hard time being okay with it. Of like, no, you don't get to like necessarily tell me what to do for some type of reason. Like, we're a team, we're collaborative. Like, we should be doing this together. I want to work with you. I want to learn from you. I don't want to just be this underling that they just have a really hard time understanding how things work that way. And I think more so for millennials, we kind of just put up with it a little bit.
Yeah, we put up with it. We vent about it, but we're not as bold in speaking up and saying what Gen Z is also saying. But that is what Gen Z is expecting from their rest of their team as well, is how can I collaborate and be a part of a team together? And on our last episode, we talked about reverse mentoring. So that's such a great way as a leader, if you're not quite sure of how to create this collaboration and make sure that Gen Z feels like they have an impact on the team as well. I think reverse mentoring is a great way to get that started. I thought this was interesting and it kind of aligns with everything we talked about today. The top 3 questions that Gen Zs are asking during interviews right now, which is how much PTO do you provide? How will my expertise be leveraged in this role? And number 3 is what's the advancement plan and how do I grow within the company? So if I'm a leader and I was looking to hire, those are 3 things that I would want to put into my job ad and make sure that I'm highlighting. But it also shows what they truly value within a business and their career. All right.
Yeah, that's a good tip to be. So if you want to be able to attract and hire Gen Zs, be ready for those questions and have a good understanding and clarity and why of everything that's going on to have that answer for them.
Derek, do you think we covered enough, or is there anything else that we want to add as a future leadership skill that might be beneficial?
I think this is good. I think we covered a lot of similarities and differences. And again, it just comes down to your leadership style. Is it adaptable enough to um, be seen as effective by both millennials and Gen Zs, with the similarities and with the differences as well?
Well, have fun, future leaders, in developing your skills for the future. And thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time.